So first of all, a couple of housekeeping things. All right. Ooh. Wow. Thank you. My table and I were saying that this is our favorite award ceremony so far. Because it kind of is like what an award ceremony should be, collegial, non-pretentious. You guys keep it moving, Speaking of keeping it moving, sorry if my remarks seem a little long, but they told me to do 6 minutes, so I did 6 minutes. And also, when I was a kid collecting, actually not Super 8, but regular 8 prints of silent films, I couldn't see Harold Lloyd films. They weren't available. They were under lock and key until like the 70s or 80s or something like that. That's so right. Anyway, you've given us such a gift, you and your family, by getting those films out there. Thanks for that. It may be indicative of my sort of filmmaking that until a few weeks ago, I had never heard of the Advanced Imaging Society, but that I do, on the other hand, know quite a bit about Harold Lloyd. And please don't take that personally. If there's anything I've learned so far here on Earth, it's that I haven't heard of most things. But now that I have heard of you and know what you do, and applaud that 15 years ago you joined together in this warm fraternity, I can't tell you how flattered I am that you opted to choose me this year for the recipient of an award that, to my utter delight, bears the name of my fellow Nebraskan and one of cinema's greatest filmmakers and comic artists. So thanks for that. But considering what you do, I do confess to scratching my head a little bit, because the movies I make are decidedly non-technological. That is, I employ few VFX shots, very little fancy filmmaking equipment, and my newest movie, The Holdovers, is even mixed in mono. Hell, over 8 features, I've done maybe a dozen crane shots, if that. Almost no Steadicam shots, maybe 3 or 4, and even then only because you can't lay dolly track on a beach. I don't even like camera cars. I prefer to tow cars. My filmmaking apparatus is basically the same as it was in Mr. Lloyd's day. A camera, a tripod, and a dolly. Then later, maybe a microphone. I guess I do appreciate things like electricity and batteries. But do I still fantasize about arc lights and hand crank cameras and sets with roofs open to the sky and draped with muslin? Leave me alone. Kevin Tent, my longtime editor and very good friend, is here. And it's in post, really, that my collaborators and I, trained on film, worship at the altar of what technology has bestowed upon us the last 25 years. Avid Pro Tools, miracles in sound mixing, extraordinary color and texture palette we get in the DI. Our new movie, The Holdovers, was designed as a period piece, not only set in 1970, but made to look and sound as much as we could like a movie actually made in 1970. You'd think I would have insisted that we shoot on film for that, but I didn't. The DP and I made tests on digital and film and quickly realized that the effects we'd have to apply in post were so extensive that really the original source didn't make that much difference. And what an odd circle we've made now to employ wonderful digital effects precisely to mimic an old movie. But there we are. And by the way, even if my filmmaking techniques remain antediluvian, I do not insist on shooting on film, although I prefer it. I don't fetishize film like some of my colleagues do, nor do I preach the gospel of digital like some of my other colleagues do. In the words of Tommy Lee Jones in that wonderful movie, I don't care. Regardless of digital or film, theatrical or streaming, my job remains exactly the same. What's the story? Who are the actors? Where do they stand? What's the design of this shot? And later, what's the order and length of each shot? And where does the music go? That's it. Technology proof. But of course, let me be the millionth person to say that the miracle of cinema, by far the finest of all the arts, is a miracle of technology, and the medium advances, as you well know, in sync with technology. It's the remarkable work with which you all concern yourselves for the production and excellent presentation of motion pictures that empowers us artists to do what we do with ever-increasing beauty, precision, and spectacle. You genuinely are our Prometheuses, and you give us the tools, and thanks. Thanks for that. Which brings me to Harold Lloyd. Most of us know that in the holy trinity of silent comedy, Keaton, Chaplin, and Lloyd, it was Lloyd who most embraced the technology of filmmaking, namely techniques of montage, increasingly lavish production values, and the embrace of sound when the time came. And while this example doesn't exactly fall under the heading of technology, you may also know that Mr. Lloyd, together with his producing partner Hal Roach, were pioneers in a practice that continues to this day, recruited audience testing. They tested the shit out of their movies, and those movies remain today absolutely audience-proof. By the way, I was telling Suzanne that Tuesday night on TCM, they happened to run Safety Last, and I TiVoed it and showed it the next day for my mom, who's 100, and her Somali-born caregiver, who had never seen a silent film. She watched it. I had to walk her through the black stereotype and the Jewish stereotype, but okay, leave that alone. And afterwards, I said, well, what did you think? She goes, it was a lot better than I thought it would be. High praise. So let me quickly insert something my esteemed colleague Jim Mangold told you guys in 2020. He said that the two steps to developing technology for the arts are first the novelty phase, where the new technology arrives and often sets back artistry. And then a secondary phase where artists manipulate technology for less obvious, more expressive purposes, when technology evolves from a marketing tool into a paintbrush. I thought it was very well said. I mention this only because the transition from silent film to talkies brought with it the premature death of an extraordinarily expressive medium, and one whose virtuosity was still in logarithmic ascent until the embrace of sound, not necessarily the existence of sound, but the commercial embrace of sound, sliced it off at the knees. It is said correctly that the arrival of sound was inevitable, but it just came too soon. Sure, Keaton and Lloyd jumped into talkies, there was little choice, but their careers were really never quite the same. Interestingly, Japan continued to make silence until 1936, as did Chaplin over here, and we're the better for it. And it's not just about having to use dialogue instead of pantomime to tell a story and beautiful design and juxtaposition of images, but it's also, I think, that the standardization of 24 frames per second inalterably deadened the texture of visual comedy, of silent comedy, that it's just not quite the same. Which brings me to me. Suzanne asked me to make a parallel in my remarks between her grandfather's work and my own. The fact that we strive to combine comedy and drama in the same story, as you illustrated. I tremble and shrink at the comparison to that great artist, but I can say that, unique among the Holy Trinity, Harold Lloyd chose a comic archetype who suggested someone you might actually know. And I also like to draw my protagonists from real life. Unlike the tramp or the stone-faced, brilliantly mythic creations, but also clowns to some degree, Harold Lloyd instead embodied the myth of the good American, the everyday Joe, aggressive, but well-meaning and innocent. Let's face it, a Nebraskan. I'm often asked, sometimes to my irritation, why do I have as a comic archetype in many of my pictures the frustrated, middle-aged white male whose ambitions, both past and present, don't match his reality? And in her own way, Tracy Flick, Reese Witherspoon's character from Election, kind of falls into that same category. Well, I hope it's not too much of a stretch to say that many of my comic protagonists are embittered comic grandchildren of Harold's can-do all-American boy. By the way, Preston Sturges beat me to it and actually used Harold that way in The Sin of Harold Diddlebach, 1947. By the way, as you sense from that clip, do yourself a favor, go home and binge on Harold Lloyd. Not really knowing how to end these remarks, as I was writing them, I'll just quote the poet Walt Whitman. Everything I have done seems to me blank and suspicious. I doubt whether my greatest thoughts are not shallow, and people will most likely laugh at me. Regardless of this, and because of this, thanks for this award.